One more for quorum. Yeah.
There's 6.
Oh.
Matt.
Didn't see him there. No, didn't see him there. Okay, we're good. Also,
in a different spot. Yay. Good thing you're here.
We're good. We're good to go. Great.
All right. Well, we're going to get started because we have a packed agenda today, and I know we have some public comments today. So
we have a few people sign up for public comment. So if you're signed up for a public comment on proposed amendments to 11, we'll wait till the public hearing, which starts at 10. If it's general comments, feel free to sign up for this portion right now. So up to you if you'd like to. But speaking to the Title 11 amendments should come during the public hearing. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Awesome.
Everybody else?
No, I didn't have anyone else signed up. Yeah.
Well, I guess we can welcome our new commissioners, and I thought it would be nice to just do some introductions with the group. So new commissioners and current commissioners can introduce ourselves, and maybe just we're going to try to keep it brief because we have a lot on the agenda today, but I do think it would be nice to get to know each other a little bit. So let's introduce ourselves and maybe just say kind of why we're here, like what brought you to the UFC, and try to keep it to like a minute or maybe just about that. So sorry. We'll give folks a second to think. And then I can go first, and I will put Commissioner Clapp on deck, so he'll be next, so you're ready.
Sounds good. I can do it.
So welcome you all. I'm Leah. I'm one of the chairs of the Urban Forestry Commission, and I think why I'm here is just recognizing how important our canopy is to protecting folks in increasing heat and just keeping our city healthy and beautiful for the people, the animals, the plants, for all the living things. So that's why I'm here. I'll pass it off to Commissioner Clapp.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'm Commissioner Clapp. You can also call me Casey if you'd like. I am on this commission as a member of the tree community. I've been an arborist for 15 years now, or at least worked in the tree area. I worked for the city of Portland under Jen Cairo's leadership as a tree inspector for 5 years. And now we work on a podcast in tree education. And I just wrote a tree ID book. So I'm just kind of in the education sector right now, doing a lot of stuff like that. So I'm here to provide expertise as an arborist, but also my understanding of the code and how things actually work on the ground. In the sense that what we do here, what the city does as a legislative and enforcement body, what we write and what actually happens sometimes don't always translate. So I want to make sure those things can connect, and all those little side things that maybe not are, or maybe are not thought of, maybe thought of, if I can. That's it. I will pass it on to Commissioner Vandermark.
Oh boy, thank you, Casey. I'm Megan Vandermark. I use she, her pronouns. I've been on the commission for over 7 years now, so I think maybe my initial why may have shifted, but in my day job, I help support community-based tree planting, and I get to work with trees and community all the time. But one thing I've talked to people about, including like staff that are interested or folks interested in getting to this field, is if you don't have places for trees, you can't plant them. So I think a lot about how we ensure that we can continue to grow our urban forest with community members. And part of that is policy. So yeah. And I'll pass to Melinda. I think you're there.
Hey, I am. I'm just having video problems as usual. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So in my day job, I am in architecture and landscape architecture. And so that kind of pushed me into understanding code and the implications of trees on building projects. But my personal drive is definitely shade equity and making sure that we start building the canopy to not only offset the just reduction, the yearly reduction in it, but to be equitable in how we do that. And I can turn over to the room.
We can pass it to Co-Chair Feldstein next.
Adrienne Feldstein, and I think we've been on the commission a bit over 3 years. I'll have to Brian tell me specifically. And come from a public health background, public health physician, and I have personally been passionate in my own life about access to green spaces and recreation. I've sort of seen what it's done for patients and friends and that kind of thing. So I'm just very passionate about expanding and increasing that, plus all the other public health aspects. I'm also on the Parks Board. So yeah. And let's see, who are we missing? Yes, please.
Maybe? Yeah. Sorry. My name is Matt Sanchez. I'm a private arborist. I currently work for Heritage Tree Specialists, a company that's been in Portland for over 30 years. Although I'm representing myself here, I've been practicing arboriculture for about 15 years at this point. I've been on the Urban Forestry Commission for about 7 minutes. I'm just passionate about trees, generally speaking. I mean, I went to universities to study trees. I talk about trees pretty much any chance I do get. And so I felt that my passion and expertise for trees would be beneficial to the City of Portland's Urban Forestry Commission. I had previously served as a chair of the City of Corvallis's Urban Forestry Beautification Commission, where I was able to help that city improve their urban landscape as well. And I'd like to continue to serve the City of Portland in a volunteer capacity, provide insight to the Urban Forestry Department, help uphold Title 11 and find ways to improve it. Thank you.
Welcome. And Commissioner Lee, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree with all of you. I'm not going to repeat what you've said. You definitely did it better than I could, but I agree. I think the canopy and just protecting the land has a direct impact on quality of life. And I've volunteered with Friends of Trees and really loved doing that and working directly with the community and kids. It's really important to me to look forward and think about future generations, to keep Portland the kind of place that I love it to be. So yeah.
Welcome. And I didn't share what I do. I work in STEM education. So that's also my connection, is thinking kind of similarly to some of you, thinking about education. I focus on pre-K through 8th grade, but my organization goes all the way through high school and beyond. So I'm also super interested in how we can connect students to some of these issues in Portland and understanding why trees are important and making some of their curriculum more local and more relevant. So that's a whole thing we can think about. But thanks everybody, you did it. You kept it to the time. So good job. All right, well, I think we can move on to meeting minutes from, it was not last month, it was from March. Are there any suggestions for edits or anything like that from our March minutes? As usual, fantastic note taking. So, all right, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a move to approve the minutes from March.
Second. Oh, you know what? I just realized we might not be able to pass that because we don't have enough people who were at the March meeting.
It's okay.
Is it okay?
It's a majority of the quorum.
Okay.
So Matt Vessa can stay since they weren't at the meeting.
Okay.
And then the rest can vote.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? I don't want to assume Matt or Vesla's information or understanding of technical processes, but could we all just explain it just in case so they understand the options available to them?
We've all experienced onboarding to the UFC, and it's kind of a fire hose situation. So you probably have a head start because you've done this before in Corvallis.
It's been a while, but yeah.
Okay, so typically the expectation is we've all looked through the minutes before the meeting, and that we've kind of tried to note if there's any mistakes in the record. And so it's an opportunity to correct those or just, bring up any issues there might be. Because these are going to be saved, and that's something we can reference in the future if we want to remember what we discussed in the meeting. So do you think that's a good explanation?
Yeah. I think that's right. And then just the general voting procedure we use is a sort of Robert's Rules of Order process. Matt and Vesla, we did do an onboarding training, but I don't think we got into Robert's Rules of Order. So, but yeah, it's generally exactly what you just saw, the motion, a second, and then vote.
Yeah, so we'll vote, and then typically if folks weren't at the meeting, they would abstain because they wouldn't be able to speak to how active it was. All right, so we had a motion and a second. All in favor of approving March minutes? 4. Is that going to do it for us? Because Melinda was not there. Okay. Yep. Any opposed? And then abstentions? Got it. Yep. Okay, so I think that's good enough.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. All right, so we can move into the City Forester's report.
Thank you, Co-Chair Plack. Good morning, everybody. And for our new folks, Vesla and Matt, welcome. Great to have you aboard. Pleased to see you here and have your advice. And our agendas always include a City Forester's report. So this will be in, like the minutes, something in at the beginning of every meeting. First, I have a few celebratory items for you. I want to start with some positive things because there's so many challenges in the world these days. First, I'm very happy to share that we have several new, expanded, and improved contracts for tree planting and establishment in place or well underway, nearing completion. You may recall that more and different contracts for this type of work and more diverse contractors are specific goals of the PSEF, Portland Clean Energy Fund funded Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative. That's the new initiative, relatively new, to add at least 15,000 new trees in priority areas. And we're doing just that. First, Friends of Trees was awarded a contract for tree planting with us, and we're very excited for a new partnership there, an opportunity to work together. Summary version, that's up to $1.8 million over 5 years. And the first year will be 300 trees and increasing after that. We also now have 13 paid outreach partners and 7 planting and establishment contractors. Half of those are COVID, which means diverse owned companies. And that's up from only 3 contractors before, only 1 of those being COVID, and only 7 outreach partners in the past. Outreach partners are folks who they're not doing the physical tree work. They are more working in their communities to help share that those opportunities exist so that people can take advantage of them. And another more celebratory positive item is that updates to the city's fees, including urban forestry's regulatory fees, have moved to the 2nd reading at City Council. So they're nearing completion, we hope. The council session itself was a little bit chaotic, still a new form of government and new council members. However, according to the council clerk, it is indeed moving to 2nd reading, which is one of the required steps for any decision at council. If it's finally approved, as Urban Forestry's proposed it, most tree permit application fees will be reduced or completely eliminated. This is thanks to, again, PSEF funding. And we all, you as well, are really excited about that, I think, because it removes barriers for people to get tree work and to implement the city's code and be part of the process and avoid issues with compliance later. Another positive thing, I've mentioned at times here that urban forestry gets a significant amount of positive feedback on the work we do, people, how they do their work, as well as on the tree code and about trees. That's not what you'd see in the media. You wouldn't expect to see, look at the great work the government's doing in the media, I think. So I want to remind us all that that does happen. And here's an example that was just from the last week or so. This was sent in regard to Rick Faber, who's our code compliance team supervisor. And it was from a property owner who was working through a compliance situation regarding some trees. Quote, "Thank you for the helpful and kind attitude. I really appreciate it. You single-handedly restored my faith in the city of Portland and made me want to stay and continue building my business here. I'm calling PDX 311, and emailing some of my counselor friends to let them know how happy I am with urban forestry and your help on this project. Moving out of celebratory items into regular items, this is more housekeeping. Our June meeting falls on Juneteenth, which is a holiday. So we're planning to move that meeting to the preceding Thursday, June 12th. So we will follow up by email to discern y'all's availability for that, to see if it's possible to have it then, if we would have a quorum. If there won't be a quorum, then we will reconvene in July. There is timely content to cover in June, including Portland Urban Forest Plan, and covering that later at the July meeting would be challenging, if not too late. So we're hoping that y'all can be available. Next item, I sent to you all commissioners via email some facts about the recent tree removal in Irvington to provide for a new ADA accessible sidewalk ramp. There is time at the end of my report today for questions on that if you need more information, or you could follow up via email, but I hope that gives you what you may have read about it in the media, and here you can see what actually transpired. Next item is an update on the Portland Urban Forest Plan. The project team is revising the draft plan in response to the public comments received. The plan will be presented to City Council's Climate Resilience and Land Use Committee as part of an informational briefing in June. Pending feedback from that committee, the team anticipates asking the commission to vote to approve the revised draft at the July meeting, so that that plan can be taken back to City Council for adoption later this summer. And this is why it would be great for us to have a June meeting. My next item, I only have two more, so second to last. I have tried to give you all updates frequently on the PSEF funded initiatives, Portland Clean Energy Fund again. In summary, all of those are on track, if not ahead of schedule. And that's thanks to our dedicated team, and in spite of a lot of other work and the new council and government restructure and impactful budget reduction process that we're all engaged in. So specifics in there, I already covered a little bit about equitable tree canopy with the contracting and also the fees elimination. Those are PSEF funded, as I mentioned. In addition, we have our first ever arborist trainees, 5 of them that started in late April. 3 of those are funded by PSEF. You've heard about that program also in the past. And the transition of the former Bureau of Environmental Services tree planting program into urban forestry, which began less than a year ago, is complete. And that included hiring people, figuring out where the trees were, establishing communications with all the customers, property owners rather. That is complete, so that's good news. Another PSEF initiative update. Plan to provide a comprehensive briefing to you all on developing the new street tree maintenance service. That'll come in the next few months, but in the meantime, here are a few quick updates. We're currently recruiting for 2 positions with a third to follow that will be leading initial program development, and that includes the program leader. Actually, there are interviews going on for that now. We're wrapping up work with the consultant to update the cost estimates and design of a pilot project. So a test case that we're going to roll out much earlier to see, test out what our structure and policies and communications will be. We anticipate that pilot project to start late in the summer or fall of 2026, not this year, but next year. We're also looking at options for more immediate support of street tree maintenance prior to full city implementation, or in other words, early rollout. Everyone's eager to see it happen. We are too. Of course, we need to build it before we can roll it out, but we're looking for ways to do that really quickly to show good outcomes and results. And we're also very close to hiring new lead staff. Actually, I think we have hired a new lead staff person for the private property tree assistance program. First ever in our city. We have learned that other cities have done something similar, which is really helpful. And the recruitment and hiring process for our first ever education lead staff is underway. They're going to lead public education, information, and communications about trees, what urban forestry does, code requirements, tree care resources, and similar. And the commission for many years has been very interested and has advised us to have more public communication. So this position will lead that, which is exciting. Last item, budget. And there's a request in this one. This meeting has a few requests of the commission. I'll give you a heads up on that. Okay, so the mayor's proposed budget was released. You've seen that information. All of urban forestry's proposed reductions were included in the mayor's budget, and we've been thoroughly briefed on those as well. In addition, and you may have seen in the media at a council meeting last week, Councilor Zimmerman proposed eliminating the urban forestry permitting and regulation team. That is 37 people, except for 5 tree inspectors, and moving those 5 tree inspectors to the Portland Permitting and Development Bureau as a savings measure. This wasn't discussed with any involved staff in vibrant community service area. So that was the first any of us had heard about that. This would cut 1/3 of the entire urban forestry team, roughly 1/3. It would effectively shelve or eliminate the tree code and the involved tree protection, required planting, and replanting, and tree care there, addressing dangerous private property trees. It would also eliminate the new PSEF-funded private property tree care program, since that is housed in that program and supported by other staff. It also would eliminate 823 trees at the city's tree customer service center. And it would also significantly limit our new street tree maintenance program and implementation of the city's urban forest plan, for which that team, 1/3 of our staff, is absolutely essential. And it negatively impacts the other parts of urban forestry, from emergency response to tree planting. And that list goes on. Also, nearly all of that group, the permitting and regulation group's funding, is levy and PSEF funded, with less than $500,000 of general fund. So doing that would not free up much general fund. So in response, our staff team quickly wrote a document to council about what the permitting and regulation team does. And we got some great questions in response for clarifications. We're glad that people are reading it. So we're working on that now. And we'll be submitting an updated version by the end of this week or early next. And right now, permitting and regulation manager Casey Jogers and a couple of leaders from her team are at council for the sustainability committee meeting, in the hopes of providing information on the impacts of that proposal, should there be opportunity to do so. May 21st is when council will hear testimony from the public about the proposed budget. And you all, as advisors to the city on budget, it would be appropriate for the commission to vote today for a member to provide testimony and or draft and submit a letter advising council on what you think of that proposal. I will put in the chat. I think I can, or send by email if I can't. Trees for Life Oregon has already written and submitted a letter to the mayor and council offices. I think it's an accurate assessment and summary of what the impacts of that proposal would be if it were taken. That concludes my report. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions. And there was a request in there of y'all.
I have one question. Going back to the proposed withdrawing of the fees for permitting, it looks like it would be enacted in July of this year. Is there going to be a overlap period where there might be reimbursements for permitting at all for folks that are applying for tree removal permits or pruning permits?
That are right now?
Yeah, so if there's like someone applies June,
yeah,
is there going to be that period of retroactive back pay?
The city's practice in these cases, because lots of policies get changed and there are things in process, is that the date that it's that it starts, it's from that date forward that it takes effect. It would be administratively, shall I say, complex, if not impossible, to do it the other way. Yeah. And just since Matt, you weren't here, and Vesely, you weren't here, the way that's working is, you know, city services historically, all the bureaus have had to charge fees to property owners and customers to recover costs to pay for the services, so pay for the staff and things like that. Because we have PSEF funding, we're using that funding to cover those costs instead of having to charge residents in Portland, which is great. And I'm going to guess every bureau in the city would love to be able to do that. I see some nods from people in other bureaus in the city.
City Forester Cairo, what did Councilor Zimmerman provide for a rationale? You said that if the entire 1/3 of the urban forestry department, the permitting regulation, all but 5 tree inspectors, if they were all eliminated, that would not actually affect significant budgets for anything else. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what was Councilor Zimmerman's rationale? Why did he propose this?
The rationale given, so we know about this from the meeting itself and the coverage of that meeting in the media. There's not a separate document that's come from council, for example. And what we understand is that he's looking to free up general fund to redistribute elsewhere in parks.
Which is how much money?
About $500,000.
And that's it?
We think that, so it's a new council, and we have offered to do briefings and take them on field tours so they could learn about our program. I'm gonna guess every bureau in the city is doing that too, to educate folks who haven't done this job before, and you can't expect folks to know what the inner workings of our government are. Those have not happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so the document I mentioned that we're updating and we'll provide to you as well, is really educational. It's like, here's what they do and here's what the funding looks like and those sorts of things. Yeah. So we're hopeful that once that information is in council's hands, that will really help them understand the implications of that proposal.
Yeah, all right, well, I hope that that is the case. It sounds more to me like a common tactic going on elsewhere in politics right now, in terms of get rid of the enforcement, but not the rules, so the rules just simply don't get enforced. Because if it's only $500,000, that is not a significant budget in terms of even the cuts that we've proposed through urban forestry. So that seems, it seems like that would be the best case scenario, but more lies underneath that. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thanks for conveying, the positive feedback that I got, the inspectors in the field and difficult situations. And I was wondering, which is certainly consistent with everyone that we've met and worked with in urban forestry and so forth. And but I'm wondering if some of the written communication has been reviewed in recent years. Someone in Irvington actually showed me a letter they received about a hazard tree or a tree labeled as dangerous. It needs to come out, a street tree. And, young families could be a ton of money. So all the kinds of things that we've talked about in here. But, it was the kind of a letter that just started out so negative when they had no contact with the city, right? And so there's so many ways to convey the same information. And I think it's just so important culturally for the whole tree area to seem as supportive as it could be and as positive. Okay, here's, you may feel terrible about your lovely tree that you've lived with for so long, that, and here's the great things it provides, but they have a lifespan and they get damaged this way. I mean, any kind of an intro sort of paragraph. So I was just wondering if, as we get a communication people, if there's a possibility of kind of reviewing the public face from A to Z, you know what I mean? To have it help the whole argument. So that's just sort of one question and comment.
Yeah, great question and comment. Thank you, Co-Chair Feldstein. I couldn't agree more. And we have done a few rounds with the Parks Now Vibrant Communities communications and public relations team to review documents. So what you're seeing is the result of that. And what we know is it's not where it needs to be. It needs to be a lot better. That is one of the things this communication person will be working on. And there's actually another person that they will hire to help with this. And many other things regarding public communications. But in any case, we right now are, again, ourselves working on reviewing and revising and also focusing on, now that we have better staffing, thanks to the levy and PSEF, which are the major funding sources for permitting and regulation. If we get to keep that team, we're focusing more on the one-on-one communication that's not written, whether it's on the phone or on site, when we can do that. And that's always been encouraged, and our inspectors try to do that. Staff capacity has been limiting, and it's sometimes hard to connect with people in person during the weekday. But upshot, you bet, we want to have better written communication as well. We're working on it. I'll mention that our city attorneys are always involved in those documents and must be. So it's a balance between like what is legally required to communicate, but how that's communicated is more flexible. And we're not waiting for the communication staff. We're working on it now. And if any of you as advisors to the city might want to help review and contribute to language and documents, especially if you have that kind of perspective or expertise. You know, we don't really have anyone on our team whose expertise is public communications beyond what you would expect from any public servant or government representative, which we know isn't really great. That's why we're hiring someone. But that could be a great role for you that might be helpful. So shoot us an email if you think you might have time to do that. We can run documents by you. Thanks for the question.
If we have time for a 10-second quick comment too on, or a thought. So on the going back to provide information to Councilman Zimmerman, do we have actually any kind of data of sort of pre-enforcement, post-enforcement? I mean, I know you'll have all the roles, right, about what that team does, and it's pretty diverse and everything.
It is.
But yeah, you know, for those trade-offs.
Great questions again. Yes, we do. And the original document we sent had some data. For example, you know, there have been some suggestions. Could you have one tree inspector? Well, there's 10,000 permit applications a year. There's 25,000 emails and phone calls that our tree techs handle. So those things we're adding to those too. We actually have quite a few metrics. We're not able to quickly develop all the metrics we might want, but we have spent a lot of time on metrics. So our entire program in urban forestry understands the value of measuring your work and being able to show people what we're doing with your money. The challenge for the permitting and regulation part of our program is that we operate in someone else's database. It's owned by Portland Permitting and Development, and it is not focused on metrics tracking. So we have had to develop that in our service standards separately. But yes, that'll be in there. Some is, more will be. We actually have so much right now, we have to winnow it down for a concise document to give to council.
Maybe following up on that, like the impacts on canopy when there aren't codes that get enforced versus, I don't know if that's a thing.
Yeah, we do have like a qualitative narrative type section on. There's not a way to quantify that. I'm sure some PhD in a university somewhere could come up with something after a few years, but it is a little convoluted. But the fact is, if there is not a tree code being implemented, we will not have the canopy that we have today. And it doesn't matter how many trees we plant, because if we're losing this, planting that, it will take 50 years, and that will be too late.
Well, I know time-wise we're running a little over, but I think we did get that request about could we vote for someone to provide testimony and or draft a letter? So maybe we try to quickly.
Or if it's a lot for one person, those could be two different functions. And I think staff could help with the letter. As we have in the past.
Yes, Commissioner Vandermark.
Thanks. Well, I think I'm trying to understand what the letter would be saying, right? Like we've kind of talked around the issue, but not what would we as a commission be attempting to communicate? I think I need some clarity on the message from us.
I think if I understand correctly, it's really advocating that that's a bad idea to cut what Commissioner Zimmerman or Councilor Zimmerman's proposal to eliminate permitting enforcement, like with the negative impacts of.
Yeah, that's up to you. I mean, maybe you think it's a good idea to eliminate a third of it. You know, that's not for us to say staff, but I'm telling you as staff that that would be devastating to everything we do currently and the things we're trying to build that y'all have been advocating for.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at the precipice of something that, for our new commissioners, something the Urban Forestry Commission's been advocating for years, which is the city being able to take care of the street trees and removing some of these fees and some of these programs, which you're saying would be really, you know, negatively impacted by a move like that. So I think for us to be able to tell that story.
So this meeting notice will address all the cuts that are proposed for urban forestry in the city budget, in the mayor's budget.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, sure. That this particular meeting on the 21st will be able to respond to all the proposed cuts to urban forestry in the mayor's budget, or
I'm sure exactly what's on the agenda there. Yeah.
Okay.
Like how broad our scope should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, that makes it tricky.
Yeah. I would just Melinda said they're willing in the chat to edit and participate in the writing of the document. I don't know that Trees for Life Oregon sent a really well written, I thought, accurate statement to City Council already that the commission could review. That could help guide what the letter could be also.
So Commissioner McMillan, you're willing to help with that, and I think you were saying city staff could help also with drafting.
Yeah, and we can help provide information. We don't advocate, but we can provide information.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be happy to write it.
Okay.
Katie to team up.
Yeah. With anyone else who wants to join.
Sure, I can chat. Maybe the three of us can talk after the meeting.
Okay,
that's great.
And testimony, do people feel like we should have something live too, or?
I'm also happy to testify if I can. I may. I have a lot of other requirements. I mean, I'll be in town depending on the time.
Yeah.
I'm willing to testify, especially if I'm writing the document and everybody agrees that that would be the basis of the testimony.
Thank you, Commissioner McMillan.
That's great.
Awesome. Okay. I mean, I really appreciate that because I do think it's going to be important for that voice of the commission to be part of this. So let's have a vote for Commissioner McMillan and Commissioner Clapp to work on this letter, as well as Commissioner McMillan testifying on behalf of the commission.
Did Megan also? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. Is Megan also volunteering or no?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Hand in the wrong
we'll
place.
Be there in spirit, maybe not in body. Perfect. Okay. Do we have a motion for that? What I just
I'll motion to have the.
Great. Yeah, Commissioner McMillan and Commissioner Clapp work on a letter, and Commissioner McMillan make public testimony. Great. Do we have a second?
All right, wait. I thought Casey was our first pick for testimony, and I was his backup.
Oh, okay. Shall we revise?
Oh, sure. Either way, it works for me.
Dependent on scheduling.
Yeah.
For commission, which we will find out ASAP. Okay, so motion for Commissioner Clapp to present at the meeting, and for Commissioner McMillan and Commissioner Clapp to work with city staff on a letter.
I can second it.
Did you motion it? Or?
I think you did.
Okay. I motioned it.
Great. All in favor? Sorry, that was like the messiest vote.
Not ever.
Okay, looks like agreement. Fantastic. All right, thanks you all. Okay, so we're a little behind schedule, but I think that was very important to address since we have to kind of move ahead with that. So let's move into our public hearing for code alignment of Title 11.
Yeah, got it. So, yes, here to join us. Yeah, that's great. Any spots.
Welcome, Nika. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll share my screen. Get the PowerPoint going. All right, take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mika Keenan. I am a project manager on the permit improvement team, and Brian and I are here today to talk about proposed amendments to Title 11 trees. Next slide. So for our agenda today, I'm going to start us off by talking about the code alignment project and how it relates to permitting improvement, and go through the guiding principles and project background, as well as the overall project proposal. And then we'll spend the majority of our time having Brian walk through the specific proposed changes to Title 11 trees. So the tree code amendments that you're going to hear, review, and make a recommendation on today are part of a larger effort to align our development-related regulations, specifically around city-imposed requirements. So I'm going to start us off by providing the project context so you can see how the tree code amendments are one piece of this larger initiative. Next slide. So the permit improvement initiative started back in 2021 with a special appropriations budget item to hire a limited term team to support permitting process improvements. And since that time, the PIT team, permit improvement team, has led many business process analysis and identified opportunities for efficiencies and technology improvements that were staff identified. This support has helped staff implement many process and technology improvements, but we also have heard throughout the past several years that there is a consistent and repeated message that in order to realize long-term sustained permitting improvements, we also need to address persistent code challenges. This need has been flagged consistently through customer surveys, staff surveys, many audit reports by our city council leadership, and also the permit improvement task force, who have all made it very clear that to improve permitting, we also have to improve our regulations. Next slide. So the strategy for the code alignment project that we call CAP is to be responsive to these concerns that so many folks have raised. And we're starting off with a small technical change to align our codes. And we are applying a small business lens and small scale development type lens. So the scope of this initial work is intended to be relatively small, so we can be timely and responsive and provide some immediate code adjustments to support an easier permit process. And we chose to focus on small businesses and small development types because they are less resourced to hire specialists to respond to permit challenges. They're often less familiar with code requirements and permitting processes. Incremental costs can quickly swamp smaller projects, rendering them infeasible. And while costs are certainly important for larger projects as well, the smaller projects have more difficulty absorbing those minor costs than the larger projects do. So we're seeking to take a smallish bite out of these regulatory challenges, but the real big win is establishing a repeatable process for ongoing CAP work, so the city can address some of the larger, more complicated policy issues. So this is cross-functional work. We're working across multiple codes, and because this is a new type of process, we wanted to create something that's repeatable so that we can address some of the bigger policy conflicts and issues down the road. The other piece of this deliverable for the project is to create a consolidated code database. So right now we have a database where staff and customers can submit code issues for Title 33, where that code might align with different regulations in that title. So this would expand this database so customers and staff can submit issues with other regulations, Title 11, Title 17, public improvements, Title 24, which is our local building code, so on and so forth. So it's just creating a one-stop resource for code issues. Next slide. So with this new form of government, we are being called to reevaluate how we do business as a city. And the CAP project reflects this change. And we have been directed to take a one city approach in all of our work. And while no one single code on its own may be a singular problem, it really is the cumulative impact of multi-layered regulations that are making Portland a difficult place to build for small scale development, such as homeowner remodels and for small businesses. So taking this one city approach, as I mentioned, involves this interdisciplinary approach, thinking holistically from each of the bureaus on how all of our codes fit together, to be iterative and adapt as we learn from each other about the different requirements each bureau is responsible for, to be responsive and flexible, because the only thing right now that's consistent is change, right? So we wanted to make sure we were keeping an eye on how our government is also evolving and to learn from each other and to be customer centered. So rather than focusing on the mission of any one specific bureau, we are looking holistically on how the cumulative regulations impact our customers and staff. We started with over 100 issues that were flagged by customers and staff to address significant pain points and evaluate how we could lower obstacles. Next slide. So we're starting with cost thresholds. And so from this list that we compiled, we began to evaluate the different issues and looking for what is something that fit within the scope of this work that could be small enough in nature that was not a huge policy issue, but represented a significant pain point for staff and customers. And there was a natural coalescence around the need to improve the cost thresholds. And it very quickly bubbled to the surface as very challenging and time consuming for everyone involved. So as a reminder, the cost thresholds are really project upgrades that the city imposes on an applicant. And these upgrades need to be made either to the site or a building that was built to an earlier code requirement. And so when they come in to redevelop that property, the city often asks for upgrades to bring that project closer into compliance with the existing standard. So this is a list of some of the challenges with the site upgrade thresholds. They're challenging, they are difficult to find within our code, so they are often a surprise to applicants. They lead to cost increases, multiple review rounds, and the improvement can often outsize the proposed project. And we also did some initial research on other cities and found that requiring these upgrades based on the project cost is not something other jurisdictions typically do. It's usually a work proposed model. So we are a little different in terms of how other cities are assessing these upgrades. So as I mentioned, from the guiding principles, we did ask the project team to keep an eye on the larger government transition and things that were happening within the city. And as this project evolved, which started just back in November, so over that 6 months time period, we began to see that the economic challenges with the city really began to unfold. The city of Portland, as we all know, is facing significant economic crisis. Permit volume is down. We're not getting revenue from fees. Tax revenue is down because of declining property values. We have general fund shortfall resulting in program and staff cuts. I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail here. We're all familiar with the situation. But I just want to also acknowledge that the tree code is not the only code that kind of elicits this perception or is a challenge. It's really just one piece of the regulatory milieu and cumulative overwhelm that customers often express when trying to develop in Portland. Next slide. So our intended amendment outcomes. So the primary purpose is to right-size requirements for small businesses and small-scale development, improve cost transparency and predictability so that applicants can anticipate costs and requirements, establish a more consistent methodology and smooth out and streamline our permitting processes. And then we also have this second purpose, the secondary purpose, to incentivize permit completion and get more projects out the door. So we do have quite a lengthy list of permits that have been approved to issue. So they've completed all of their review cycles, all of their requirements are met. They just have to pay their final permit fees and begin work, but people are really sitting on those permits. There's hundreds of them and just waiting for something to change so that they can pay their permit fees and begin development. And they're just kind of waiting for something to happen. So the partial intent of this is to motivate people to complete those permits and begin to build. Next slide. So we are looking at cost thresholds across 4 different codes. In addition to Title 11, we're looking at seismic evaluation in the building code, Title 24, non-conforming site upgrades in Title 33, the zoning code, and frontage improvements in Title 17, public infrastructure. So this table shows all of the thresholds that we're looking at. The requirement is down the left-hand side with the different requirements listed in the columns preceding to the right. I am not going to bore you with all of these details, but I think this is a good visual of how difficult it is for people to try to figure out what the requirements are and then take that another step and figure out how they apply to their project. It also takes a significant amount of time for staff to try to explain these as well. I will point out in the threshold column, which is the second one from the left, which shows all of the project valuations. And the note here is that they're all different. Project valuation for trees is $25,000. It's a math equation to figure out street improvements. There's different dollar thresholds for seismic evaluation and site upgrades. So that is really what we sought out to bring into alignment with this project. Next slide. Thanks, Brian. So this also has, if you click it, it'll show the, there we go. So here is our proposed solution. And I just want to point out that we did look at a lot of different options for bringing our thresholds into alignment. We looked at creating one fee. We looked at creating one square footage threshold. We looked at indexing things to the same cost index so that they could continue somewhat methodically and consistently. And as we started looking at all of these different options, it became very clear that it was going to be quite complicated and take some time to figure out how the bureaus could both meet the needs of their own individual bureau, but also reach this other intent of aligning and becoming consistent with each other. So folks felt that in order to do the policies justice, they would need to spend a lot more time doing the research, working with stakeholders, and evaluating the data and evaluating different proposals against data to see what those outcomes would be. So we landed on a proposal to pause a lot of these upgrade requirements until 2029. So for the street tree planting for new construction is $25,000. So that threshold would be suspended. However, we would still continue to apply street tree planting requirements for all new construction. So that is very consistent with how other jurisdictions evaluate and require street tree planting, and then pausing to propose street tree planting with additions and alterations. That means the $25,000 threshold would be suspended, as well as getting those trees with those development types. The one thing to note here, however, is that if there are right-of-way improvements, we would still continue to ask for street trees in those situations as part of that right-of-way improvement, and still require space to be reserved for additions and alterations if there is disturbance in the right-of-way. So for example, if someone's doing an internal ADU and utilities need to be run through the right-of-way, there would still be an opportunity for urban forestry to preserve that street tree planting space, but not ask the property owner to plant the tree, just to preserve that space so that when PSEF funding allows the city to take over more of those programmatic pieces, urban forestry could go through and plant those trees, and we would not lose that space. And so this proposal to suspend these requirements until 2029 is consistent for the other code amendments that are being proposed. Next slide. The non-conforming upgrades piece. So although the Urban Forestry Commission is not making recommendations pertaining to Title 33 changes, we did want to share this slide for general context. The relationship here is that as part of the non-conforming upgrade suspension, non-conforming upgrades being site improvements, on-site trees or tree density will be suspended for additions and alterations as well. This is not to say that every site that triggers these site upgrades would be planting trees. Sometimes there's already existing trees. Sometimes they choose one of the other elements in this list to make their upgrade. But there is this kind of connection between Title 33 and Title 11 for this one specific component. Next slide. So our proposal for the near term again is to suspend cost thresholds for additions and alterations until January 1st, 2029. We did, just one quick note is that we are using the same date that was currently put in the zoning code as part of the HRR, the Housing Regulatory Relief Project, where they suspended non-conforming upgrades until this date for projects that included a residential element. So we are just piggybacking on that date that's currently in place in Title 33. The seismic evaluation report, street trees, and the site upgrades, we would suspend those thresholds until 2029, and we continue to require the frontage improvements for new construction, seismic strengthening for unreinforced masonry, and site upgrades with new development. They would still need to meet current requirements. And long-term, we're proposing to develop a permanent solution by 2029. So this really gives all of the bureaus an opportunity to do that deeper dive into what makes sense for their codes and for their infrastructure, and also to align with the other bureaus. So that concludes my portion, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to get to the way more interesting pieces of this presentation around Title 11.
Okay, I'm going to go through the proposed changes to Title 11, the city's tree code. There's 4 changes I'll be talking through. There are changes to the tree plan requirements, on-site tree density, street tree planting, and then tree planting size specifications. Before we get into that too much, I wanted to clarify, particularly for our new commissioners, the Urban Forestry Commission's role when Title 11 amendments are proposed. So the Urban Forestry Commission is advisory to City Council on proposed Title 11 amendments. So today we have staff's recommended changes. And then from here, it's the Commission's role to make recommendations to City Council on those. And so there are really 3 options available to the UFC. They can recommend that City Council approve and adopt the proposed changes to Title 11. Recommend with conditions, so you could offer alternatives or changes to those recommendations. Or the UFC can recommend that City Council not adopt the proposed changes. So by the end of today's meeting, the Commission will be asked to take a vote on what their recommendation is, and then move forward to draft a statement. This is planned to go to City Council in July. If the Commission runs out of time today, we could do this in June, but it would require a commitment to meet in June at the rescheduled time. So I want to be clear on what the sort of Commission's responsibility here is. And so before I get into the amendments, I want to just give a really simplified overview of how Title 11 requirements apply to the types of developments that we're talking about today. So Just very quickly, shown here is a site plan for a development project from a few years ago. This is a, you've heard new construction, alteration, addition. This is an alteration. It's a change to an existing site. This is an existing structure. In this case, a single user restroom was added. So what you're seeing here is the site plan. And you'll hear a reference to the tree plan various times today. So the tree plan is just ensuring that all of the trees on site and the street trees are shown on the site plan. This is a really critical step in sort of preserving trees during a development situation, identifying where they are and how the proposed development might actually impact those. And so it's depending on the project, there might be additional on-site trees required to be planted. There might be street trees required to be planted if there is space. In this situation, there's not space. You can see that the right-of-way is fully stocked up right now. And this is a good example of a type of project where we are looking to provide some changes to Title 11. This is a project that under the proposed new code would not be required to plant a new street tree. And it's also an example of a project where all of the work being done is inside the existing structure. So there's no ground disturbance or other activity that could impact the trees. So it's a great example of where the tree plan may not be really necessary to get the tree outcomes from the project that we want, because there is no real threat to ground disturbance that could damage the tree roots, and there's no need to plant new street trees. So that's just a little bit of an example as I go through all the different proposed changes. So the first change we're proposing pertains to that tree plan requirement. It's currently required whenever regulated trees are present on site or in the street. And we've received frequent feedback that this can be a burden as part of the permit application and review process for projects which are either exempt from tree planting requirements or not proposing any exterior work. So this proposal would allow for the city to waive this requirement for alteration projects specifically, which are entirely within the actual structure. The applicant would still be required to meet tree protection requirements. So it's not that they don't have to preserve and protect trees. It's just that they don't need to go through this more robust process of submitting an actual tree plan. And so here's the actual change to city code. When we show these, if the language is struck through, it's being proposed to be removed. If it's underlined, it's being proposed to be added. So in this case, the city administrator may reduce the tree plan requirement for development alterations that do not include changes to topography, landscaping, exterior improvements, street improvements, or gross building area. Essentially, if the work being done is contained it says interior only. So that's the first proposed change. 3 more, and I think if we can just hold questions till the end, we get to all of these. The second one is related to the non-conforming upgrades, the suspension of the non-conforming upgrades requirements. So this is really just a technical change to Title 11 to align the proposed changes to the non-conforming upgrade requirements in Title 33. So with changes to Title 33, the project valuation threshold will no longer be relevant since Title 33 on-site upgrades requirements will be paused until 2029. So this really just amends the language to sort of future-proof Title 11 as those changes to code are made. And so again, at the bottom, you can see in the strike through and the underline what those proposed changes are. Next, we'll talk through the street planting requirements. So as Mika mentioned, under current Title 11, any new construction, addition, or alteration project valued at more than $25,000 triggers a new street tree requirement. This involves the application paying a street tree review fee so that Portland permitting and development tree inspectors can assess the right-of-way and determine if a new street tree can be accommodated. And if it can, then the applicant is required to plant that tree. That $25,000 threshold was established in 1990. Obviously, it has started to bring into it smaller projects than originally intended when that went into place. And this is part of the challenge of having dollar thresholds within city code, which are difficult to change. That $25,000 pays for a lot less today than it did then. And so our proposal would be to exempt additions and alterations from this from the street tree requirement up until that sunset date in 2029. New construction would still be required to plant street trees. And one exemption to this, if an addition or an alteration triggers a frontage improvement. So this is really captures those kind of more significant additions and alterations, where if they need to add a sidewalk or otherwise bring the right of way up to standard, it would then trigger the street tree requirement. So if there's work being done in the right of way, they're creating space for a street tree, it does sort of add back in that street tree requirement. And so this really allows us to focus on these sort of smaller projects, additions, and alterations, which are triggering this requirement now. Over the life of Title 11, it's been around 900 street trees that per year that the street tree planting requirement has resulted in. They're split fairly evenly between additions and alterations and new construction. So by eliminating or suspending the requirement for additions and alterations, it would be around 450 fewer street trees planted per year. Although that is looking at the past, that's looking over the last 10 years. Portland had very high levels of development during that period. We have much lower right now, and are projected to be lower for the next 5 years. So I don't think we would expect that many to be planted typically going forward. But that is what we've seen in the past. And I think an important consideration as we are looking at we're looking at a proposal that's going to get less public benefit out of the private development activity that we've had. We do have more tree planting resources than we have had in the past. And so that's just, I think, a consideration as the UFC is considering this proposal that with PSAP, we are increasing overall tree planting to about 10,000 trees every year. So I think that's something to consider as part of the how regulatory tree planting fits into the sort of overall picture. And this is just a way of displaying that as specific to the street trees themselves. A lot of these are projections, so I would say use this not for specific numbers, but just an order of magnitude understanding of what percentage regulatory tree planting has been in terms of the overall picture, and where we see it going because of the new PSAP resources that we have. So this shows the really significant increase in city provided tree planting. We talked about some of the contracts that are coming on board earlier, as opposed to the impact of suspending additions and alterations and the sort of modest growth of new construction over the next few years. And then this is the actual language of that change, suspending it until 2020 to 2029. And this is all in your packet and the staff report as well, if you want to look more closely at that. Lastly, is the last amendment before we can move to questions and discussions of the UFC, is specific to 11.60. This is the sort of technical requirements of code. So this is looking at the, so trees planted under permits must meet the size requirements that are listed here. For street trees, they need to be 1.5 inch caliber up to 2.5 inch caliber based on the actual zoning on site. And so generally smaller trees can be planted in residential areas while commercial areas require larger trees. And just to be clear, in this instance, by tree size, we don't mean the size of maturity. We're not talking about the species of the tree, but the actual size of the tree stock being actually planted. So the proposed amendment would allow for the city forester through an administrative rule process to amend the tree caliper size planting requirements. The administrative rulemaking process includes opportunities for public involvement. including a 30-day public comment period, and the commission would be notified of those changes. So this amendment does not make any specific changes to those requirements. It allows for the city forester through an established administrative rule process to either require smaller trees or larger trees in certain cases as well. One of the reasons we're proposing this is part of an effort to make it easier to meet Title 11 requirements, and also to help facilitate increased tree planting throughout the city. So I think it's something we can get into more when we look at the actual admin role. But I think this is a really important step to facilitating those 10,000 trees per year. And then this is the actual change to the code. So right now the city forester may allow smaller or require larger trees, but it's only to suit the specific site conditions. It doesn't allow for more programmatic wide changes. And so this is simply removing the to suit the site condition. So it allows more flexibility for these changes than we actually have now. So those are the amendments. And just to review the commission's role again, you have 3 options in terms of what recommendation you make to city council. And I think now's a good time we can move to Mika for in terms of next steps here.
So just for our key dates, for May, we did post the proposed amendments on the CAP webpage, which you all have a copy of. We are going to Planning Commission for a public hearing on June 10th. And then in July, we are going to bring these to a council committee for review. The council president will decide which committee reviews these amendments. And then we'll go for a first reading also in July. And then in August, we would do a second reading. It takes 30 days for a code to be implemented after it has been approved after the second reading. So we are looking at the beginning of October effective date.
So I think now's a good time we can do questions. And maybe some sort of clarifying questions for the commission. And then I know we do have public comments signed up as well.
What is the cost of planting a tree? You guys have proposed removing it, but all the other things that you had on the list were much more expensive. So how much is planting a tree? What does that look like for developers?
Yeah, I mean, it can vary for sure. It depends on what sort of site, what preparations on site to plant the tree. I think it's, I would definitely say the Title 11 requirements are the lowest cost of everything on there. That's absolutely the case.
So the city has a general mitigation fee for planting trees, correct? How much is that?
Yeah, so it's $600 or $450 per inch, so around $725 per tree.
$725.
Yeah.
Versus all the other things that were on there that are like improvements of non-reinforced masonry buildings. So it feels like the proportion of what that would actually do if we did cut out the requirements like CAP is recommending to get rid of the street trees, that's a drop in the bucket. That's not actually stopping any significant thing. That's cheaper than the permit itself to even go in for work. So it doesn't seem to me that that's really a significant step in actually cost savings. There's no one that I can imagine saying, man, I really would build this house if I just didn't have to plant that tree. That doesn't seem like it's really a significant barrier, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that comment. I think a few things that we considered when we were proposing this is, one, we are looking at, these are smaller projects, so we're not typically talking about a developer. We're talking maybe about a property owner who is finishing their basement or renovating a bathroom or a kitchen. And so they might be doing a lot of this themselves or doing the permits themselves. And so it is often sort of like property owners or maybe small retail, small business owners that are doing types of work like this. So there's sort of like a compounding effect. A lot of these smaller things add up. And so we're trying to look at what is the cumulative impact of all the city requirements. And a few other things is that there's the cost of the tree, there's the cost of the review the city does. So that's another $600 or $700 to.
But they're going to do that anyway. that's still happening. The city would still be reviewing and just say, save this space for a tree, but you don't have to plant the tree.
Not necessarily. So there's some process changes, but most of these would not be required to do the actual review because they're exempt from the tree planting requirement. And so that saves on the permit fee. It means they would not have to do a tree plan because there's not a need to inspect the right of way because it's all the work being done inside the site and there's no street tree plant requirement. So there's the cost of the plan, there's the review fee, there's the cost of planting. We've also found that about 80 or 75 to 80% of the time, a review is paid for and happens, but there's no space to actually plant the street tree. So we're only getting a street tree sometimes in 15 to 20% of all of those. So 80% of the time, the applicant is paying a fee, doing a tree plan, and no tree is planted. I think in new construction, that's valid. That is part of, that's a significant upgrade. But I think with some of these smaller projects, it starts to feel to a lot of applicants like they're being asked to do a lot and pay a lot without actual public benefit resulting. So I think that's why we're trying to be a little more thoughtful in terms of, well, what are we actually getting out of this versus what are we asking of the property owner?
It's going to add time to the project.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? Yeah, and complexity and just frustration, right? You have to do all these things and now I have to do this. It's not related to the project. But I appreciate the projects looking at our data, seeing what our outcomes happen and identifying that it's relatively infrequent that planting a street tree is a result of the project. And I wanted to add, Commissioner Clapp, just to add to Brian's information about a tree plan. The concept of a tree plan, why we need it, is to see if the project may impact existing trees as well as if tree requirements are met or need to be met. In something like a basement renovation or upgrading your bathroom and kitchen, there's no activity happening outside of the building. There might be equipment, construction siting, that sort of thing outside the building. However, the understanding and the expectation is there's not a need to have a tree plan because there's no risk to the trees that are on site already. I would like to know what the idea behind the siting, construction siting is.
Sorry.
When you're renovating your basement or something, you know, there's going to be equipment and there's materials and those sorts of things, and those may have impacts on existing trees, which is a purpose for a tree plan. So was that contemplated at all?
Yeah, and so that's where the idea that we're really still being clear that tree protection is required. So instead of the tree plan, there'd be the applicant would receive information on what their required tree protections are, so that we're dealing with construction stage and things like that.
Commissioner McMillan, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I'm impressed with overall the code changes and suggestions. Couple questions. The tree plan sheet in any permit not only shows the plan, and I'm just thinking of these small contractors, homeowners that might not be aware of those requirements. What's part of a tree plan is also details on how existing trees will be preserved during construction. It shows fences, it shows notes to contractor, and I'm just thinking these smaller owners won't be familiar with that. I know the code touches on it, and I'm just wondering if not requiring the tree plan, do we require an acknowledgement of the protections needed elsewhere? Or, you know, maybe we show those details somewhere else in the plan. There's only usually one detail, but it's very important. Do we address that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Dan Gleason, our sort of technical lead on this, was supposed to be here today, but he had to be at City Council. So I would normally refer that to him. I will say that there are some process steps we worked out, and that's why our code language simply allows for that requirement to be reduced or waived, rather than proposing specifically what that would look like. And so I think that's a really good comment. And that's something that, as we kind of look at what the implementation looks like, is something that we can keep in mind. Okay. If the group agrees, maybe we make that a condition if we go ahead and approve this. I had a second question. Is there an upper threshold of maybe a larger
a larger project, and the tree requirements, the landscaping requirements, I'm just thinking of, I don't want to give developers an off of, bowing out of these requirements. I saw that 10% of the construction budget could go to these landscape improvements. I'm wondering if that's variable based on the type of construction. Something like a skyscraper is an immense budget, but very little landscape. Or some buildings like research buildings or medical buildings, emergency buildings are so expensive, and requiring 10% of those, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the percentage of landscape or cost. So is there an upper threshold, or is that something that is variable?
Yeah, good question. I'll let for the street tree requirement. So what Melinda's referring to. So within new construction, it does say that the cost of the new street tree required planting, the cost is capped at 10% of the project value. So that is sort of intended for like really small projects to not have the street tree planting end up taking up a disproportionate share of the overall project. With street trees and new construction, it doesn't tend to become much of an issue, but I imagine with maybe some of the non-conforming upgrades, it looks different. So I'll let Morgan speak to that.
Thanks. For the record, Morgan Tracy, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, also part of the CAP team. I think the question is a great one. What I wanted to highlight most importantly is that was the kind of question that we were wrangling with as this project was being developed. Like, how do we set that particular threshold? Where is that magic number? And it is variable. There's a proportion sort of relationship. The large skyscraper example is going to be new construction, so we're still covered there. There are questions around how this would apply to like an institutional use. So OHSU is doing a fairly significant building, but their campus is immense. And so their responsibility for street tree planting would apply to their entire site. So there can be disproportionate impacts there. So just trying to get this thing right tuned proved a lot more challenging than we thought, just kind of starting with our basic assumptions. And as we started looking more at the details and talking to the implementation staff, there are a lot of caveats that we just needed to consider. So that's a bit of the purpose of why we're like, okay, well, let's start with a sort of timeout on these. We know that they have an impact. They are frustrating certain customers. They're not a big ticket cost item necessarily all the time, but they are sort of one of the sort of cumulative impact issues that we're trying to be responsive to. So in the interim period, let's work toward a solution that is more related to the level of impact.
Right, thank you.
And just to piggyback on what Commissioner McMillan said, I also feel like a lot of homeowners would appreciate that education about protecting their trees, because it could be so devastating to like unintentionally destroy a tree that you valued a lot on your property. So I also saw that as like, oh, the new education communications person could really help with that communication piece so that people understand. Because these are really technical diagrams, and like a layperson's gonna be like, what? Absolutely. Commissioner Lee.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to understand better. I believe it was Amendment 4 about like the size of the stalks of new trees to be planted. That it sounds like the proposed plan is to allow for like more discussion about the sizes of those trees, and then like a ruling instead of just like a set size for private and public areas, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, good questions. I can clarify that a little bit. So the amendment itself gives greater discretion to the city forester to set those size requirements. What we plan on doing, we have a draft administrative rule that we'll be bringing to the UFC in the next month or two. But it would still set the requirements across all permits. So it would not be a case-by-case, permit-by-permit choice, because we want this to be a predictable standard. But it would do, like one example is it would allow for so right now, if a property owner removes the tree from their property, they need to replant it. That size threshold, it needs to be a 1.5 inch tree. the administrative rule would allow it to be a half-inch caliber tree. So smaller tree, but that would allow, makes it easier to acquire those trees. It's also looking at, could some of the PSEF funded trees be used to meet that requirement? Those, in some cases, those are smaller. So it's a way of reducing the sort of steps needed to be taken to be in compliance with the tree code. But it wouldn't be a case by case basis. It would be across all of the permits.
Thank you, Brian. I want to add for the arborists in the room, Vesta, if you give me a minute. And it is based on data and outcomes we have seen from our free yard tree program, which are small stock trees, not 1.5 inch caliper, and our survival rates, and this is establishment by the property owner, not professionals, are very, very high. So we're thinking that it isn't necessary to have that larger, more expensive stock in order to get the tree growth that we want.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, great transition, because this was one of the two things I wanted to comment on. One, I am excited about this as someone that has worked in trying to get a lot of trees planted. I think this variability is really important for both tree health, right? Because of that research that Jen is referencing. But also just for tree stock, I really want to highlight it. Trees are getting really expensive, and it's something that I've run into in my work. It can be really challenging to source trees for even just the general public. So I'm excited to see the potential of variability. My other question, though, is just related, and I recall, Brian, that you had talked about this when it was kind of bringing some of these up. Could you kind of talk about with the pause that is being proposed, kind of what the potential number of trees that may or may not be planted actually based on during this period of time? Because I know that some of the feedback I've heard from the public, right, is concern about that pause period. So just having a better understanding of during this proposed pause, what will or will that not mean for the number of trees being planted?
Yeah, it's difficult to project. My understanding of the permit data is additions and alterations are the overall volume is fairly similar to the past. So I do think maybe that 450 trees a year, probably reasonable to expect if we weren't making any changes, we would see probably those 450-ish a year going forward. So I think that is a fair estimate of the reduction in required tree planting through projects like that per year. New construction is what is less common at the moment. And so, there's been about 475 trees a year through new construction. I don't have a percentage decrease to expect or what the increase would look like over the next few years. So I would guess fewer than those 475 per year, but I'm not sure how low it would necessarily go.
Maybe just to do a little math, because yeah. I love calculators. I looked at 450 trees per year. This is a 3.25 year pause period between October 1st and January. So that works out to 1,462.5 trees. We hope there's no after.
And just a quick time check. I want to make sure we hear from public comments. So just so we don't feel too rushed, and we do have some heritage tree items that we need to get to. I'm just going to propose for the commission to consider maybe after the public comments, we do like a temperature check. Is the commission feeling like they're in a position to vote on the recommendation, or do we need to put that till June and then pick it up then?
For a couple questions. One more or less comment. I do agree that it's a great idea to kind of give a bit of an option for size thresholds on tree planting, and someone that procures and plants trees on a frequent basis. Larger trees are much harder. Survivability is much lower. So I would just agree on that. going back to the taking back the requirement for street tree planting for interior projects, and then I guess I'm finding a bit of a disconnect on kind of the statement from this change is the city is now saying that they want to plant or use the PSF planting as a way to kind of make up for the tree planting that's not going to happen for interior improvements. Is there a way to get better language that does say that that tree planting, you know, is going, this 10,000 trees a year is going to fill in those holes for those specific properties? Or is there going to still be a tree plan required that shows that a tree will be planted, but then potentially covered by those PSF? Yeah, I think that's where I think the Tree for Life comments are kind of concerned about as well. These other folks that have commented is that these properties are kind of getting off the hook. They're not putting canopy in the neighborhood that otherwise benefit from it. But we can say that this program that's awesome is going to plant these trees so these people don't have to do it, but we can keep development going for them. Yeah, that's a good distinction. So the tree planting funded by PSF follows the city's established tree planting strategy, which prioritizes low-income, canopy neighborhoods of the city. It's also guided by a advisory group that PSF has convened over that program. That program will not be looking at recent development and going to fill those in. So I want to be clear on that. That's not what's guiding the tree planting program. I think what we were trying to emphasize is that one of the benefits of having a street tree planting requirement in development for these additional alterations is that there's review happening to ensure space for the tree to be planted. So if there's a new utility connection going in, that might go through the right of way, and we have spacing requirements to plant away from those. So when the street tree review is happening, a tree inspector is involved to say, place that utility line, that gas line here, so we can put the street tree here. If we don't have the street tree plan requirement, that review is not happening. And so what I think the reference is we are looking at ways within the process to ensure if a new utility connection is happening, a tree inspector is involved to make sure it's placed in a way that doesn't prohibit eventual tree planting. Not that our program would come in the near future necessarily, because it might be in a low priority neighborhood of the city for tree planting, but that the right of way would not be impacted in such a way that we can never plant a tree there. So I think, I know it gets a little bit in the weeds, but it's trying to get as positive of an outcome as we can without going through a full review and planting requirement.
And just to follow up, because this popped into my head as a question about, does that involve also like paving? So leaving an unpaved area for a tree to be planted, or is it really more about placement of utilities?
I think it's more about the placement of utilities, because we wouldn't be requiring, if there is a street tree plant requirement, sometimes there is some like deep paving that can be required to make the space for the tree. But if we're not doing that review, we're not requiring that. Yeah.
And I would think things like curb cut placement isn't relevant because that's not changing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
No, curb cut placement would be relevant. That's essentially taking up a planting position possibility.
It is, but in these cases, these are again internal modifications that are not affecting right of way. So
not moving that.
That's right. That would be a different permitting process that's not included in the cap.
Very quick clarification. Could you just put your data slide up on the tree impact? I just had a couple of questions there.
Yeah, sure.
And it was more historically, you know, if we went forward with this, what percentage do we know our frontage and just sort of, it couldn't quite get that impact.
Is this the one you're referring to or the one before?
That was the one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so basically now in additions, alterations, if it was interior, it would not, you know, so do we know what percentage of that first one it was interior versus exterior?
Oh,
you see what I mean? And then in the new construction, like the frontage versus the, because it's just hard to figure out really.
Yeah, I don't have that breakdown. It's been part of the challenge of implementation of how to design this, because the policy needs to align with the process and what data is available in the collection from the applicant and what's in the permit software. So I don't think we have it broken down exactly.
So the impact is something less than this.
Right, because if we have frontage improvements, we will still have some street trees planted. So that's a really good point.
And then could you just give us a simple example of like a non-frontage exterior modification, you know, that's been a rub in the past. And
I would give you a good example of that.
Open up the bathroom wall.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah.
like an exterior sort of challenge. One of the pros, just looking through our list of permits, $28,000 value permit for demolishing an exterior chimney down.
okay, yeah, got it. Okay, so
So
simple.
go to that project, that property
external
owner.
building stuff. Okay,
Property
that's a
owner
big
is
deal.
shocked.
doesn't have to
Just
plant
taking
straight
my chimney out. And I
Yes,
have
yes, yes,
$7
yes.
for things.
Yeah.
Trees are falling apart.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
That's a little cherry picked, but scanning really quickly.
We'll make sure we get to our public comments, so maybe we can shift over to that.
Want me to go first?
Sure, yeah, that's great, thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Barbara Wharton. I'm very happy to be here representing Trees for Life Oregon. We did submit a much longer, more comprehensive testimony in writing, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to keep it short here today. TFLO supports the intent to develop simpler, more cohesive code triggers and better procedures for administering the upgrades required for additions and alterations to existing development. But we are concerned about the proposal to suspend these upgrade requirements for 4 years while code amendments and better procedures are developed. We are most concerned about losing requirements affecting on-site trees, street trees, and improvements that support public health and climate resilience. Further, suspending existing city code requirements for 4 years while staff addresses code cleanup is not common practice and would set a negative precedent. We also believe that the upgrade requirements to plant street trees and on-site trees are less costly and onerous than some of the other upgrade requirements proposed for suspensions, such as street improvements and seismic evaluations. The proposal's intention is to improve customer service for developers, but it reflects staff collaboration only with development interest. Ultimately, it needs to reflect public feedback and serve the city as a whole, which means balancing policy and goals. In recent discussion with staff, we learned that Portland's upgrade requirements are in some cases more stringent than those of other peer cities. In particular, our upgrade requirements for projects involving only interior improvements seem to be atypical and are often perceived as code overreach. To balance Portland's goals for development, public health, and climate resilience, we recommend revising the staff proposal to limit the suspension of Title 33 non-conforming upgrade and Title 11 street tree planting upgrade requirements to apply only to projects involving interior improvements. We also recommend that any outcome include monitoring and transparent reporting, at least annually, to City Council and the public, detailing the impact suspension or suspended city upgrade requirements. Reporting will allow for appropriate programmatic corrective action based on the loss of canopy or canopy opportunity during the prior period. Thank you.
There's one ticket. Oh, yes, sure. My name is Ariel Bittner. I'm a citizen here in Portland, and I was made aware of this through a Friends of the Trees email. I urge you to revise the code alignment proposal so it doesn't suspend tree protection for 4 years. Trees are vital to Portland's climate resilience, air quality, and public health. These requirements cost developers little, but they mean everything for our communities. Please limit the suspension to interior remodel only and ensure that there's a plan to track and report the impacts that have been made. Let's not weaken our urban forest when we need it the most. We came from Stumptown, and let's read urban forest.
I do see at least one hand raised on Zoom. So Lynn, I'm gonna bring you in, provide your comment.
Hi, my name is Lynn Spitaleri Handlin, and I am a small business owner in outer Southeast Portland, and I understand the need for some of this code alignment. I myself ran afoul of the city's convoluted laws as a small business owner trying to do a fairly minor change, and I ended up not being able to do it because of the weird regulations that, among other things, would have required me to cut down for mature trees. So I understand the need to clean up the code, but we can't be cleaning up the code and have any reduction in new tree planting and no possibility of more mature trees being cut. This that is just such a bad idea. I understand, especially for like the interior only things that are just interior improvements. I think that that is a reasonable change, keeping in the requirements to protect trees from construction equipment. But other than that, I think that's a great idea. In part, I'm also concerned with the process. It seems like this program was developed not in consultation with tree people, but mostly in consultation or only in consultation with the development folks. And that leads to badness. We need a little bit more balance there. So also I'm concerned that, we do this now and it's just a few homeowners doing little tiny projects. And I don't know, it seems like these things always end up leading to escalation later, and it's a slippery slope, allowing bigger projects to have ever more, relaxation of the tree codes. Our tree codes need to be strengthened now, not weakened. And having them weakened for 4 years is frankly horrifying. So I'm really hoping that you will fix this and follow the recommendations of the Trees for Life folks. I was part of a group that signed on to their letter, and yeah, so please consider that. We really need our trees, especially, well, everywhere in Portland. We need to be saving our trees and adding more. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Lynn. And I see one more, Carol.
Hello, my name's Carol Pinniger, and I live in Cully, East Cully, and I'm a member of the Forest Defense team of 350 PDX. I am not necessarily speaking on behalf of 350 PDX, but what the heck. I really appreciate Commissioner Clapp's pieces of the conversation during this hearing, and I would like to say that I agree with Trees for Life's proposal. And also, perhaps it's too complicated, but as I listened to your discussion during the meeting about public education, bringing on board some public education people, I'm thinking that if that person could collaborate with a graphic designer, I realize you probably don't have a graphic designer in your wheelhouse, but somehow work with a graphic designer to provide graphics that explain the tree code to smaller developers so that they're not surprised when they go to permitting about the necessity of providing trees. I'm just thinking that's one way of dealing with the cumbersome aspects of getting a permit for work. Thanks.
All right, thanks everyone for taking the time to come speak with us. We really appreciate that a lot, to hear from all of you. So commissioners, do we feel like we're ready to vote, or do we need some more time in June?
Brian, could you put up the exact things we're discussing again?
Yes.
The 4 amendments that are being proposed. Thank you.
slide.
I personally feel like it would be nice to consider this and then vote again, because there are some amendments that I would like to propose to the group, including I don't know, middle ground perhaps, something that wouldn't be so drastic in terms of turn on, turn off. So I would prefer to at least do that, review this, provide something to the rest of the commission so that we could actually, I don't know, consider a few ideas without having 10 minutes left and still have other things on our agenda. That'd be nice.
Yeah, and also because, I mean, we don't deal in code things every day, so it's sort of dizzying how this all fits together. I mean, I just want to clarify though, based upon some of the testimony we heard and everything. So the tree planting size specifications, it sounds like there's general agreement on that that's a good thing, right?
I think so, yeah.
You know, I'm struggling now for like where, you know, some of the rubs are really in this. You know, the street tree planting, I mean, as you talked about, like external modification, like a chimney change, right? Is there a way to have language to say, okay, this is internal modification, is not going to, you know, we're going to suspend that, but external, if it's limited to X, Y, Z, then the code would be suspended for that, right? So versus, as you say, an on-off. Yeah, and where that fits in. So if you could help us to sort of narrow, okay, here's really where the rubs are and where your decisions are, and therefore, and here's a couple of options based upon all of our feedbacks. That would probably help.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Yeah, I want to agree. Just sometimes it's when you're trying to digest what people are sharing, it is hard to do that on the spot and be thoughtful. And this is kind of adjacent, but I do want to bring it up. I just want to be really aware that one education position is not going to solve the problem. And I just want to put that out there because at the end of the day, who people engage with are actually like tree inspector staff, like the staff that do these things, like folks with code. So I just want to be really aware that like what we need to really focus on is how information is communicated and clear. And yes, so like creating clear ways to do that, but it really is, it's both what the code is, but how people work with the public around the code. So I just don't want to have a delusion that one person, they must be very talented, but is going to solve that, right? So we have a lot of larger things we need to like help with the general understanding.
So, yeah.
So it sounds like we'll vote next month.
Finish in June. I know we've got Heritage Tree folks here on some fairly urgent removal requests. So.
And I see Commissioner McMillan's comment in the chat. I just don't want to miss that too. I can't. There was another one that came in.
I would also move to add that we should make this meeting longer. I've said this multiple times, I'll say it again.
Has come up before.
Yes, it seems silly for us to constantly jam everything in like this for 2 hours when we could say, great, now let's talk for 45 minutes and come up with a solution rather than continually pushing it off and causing ourselves our own anguish. So I would move that towards everyone. I know it's more to ask for volunteers. I'm a volunteer myself, so I'm asking myself to also do that.
Well, we only have about 10 minutes, so I think we'll have to pivot for now to heritage trees. But yes, we'll come back to this next month, and then I think we can all hopefully take some time this month to look at it on our own time a little bit, so we're not feeling quite so rushed.
Yeah, so. Brian, could you send us that exact piece of slides?
Yep, yes, thank you. Sure. Yeah, will do. And there is a staff report posted that covers a lot of this as well, but I'll send the slides.
Yeah, I read through the link. The slides are much more clear.
Okay.
And you'll see the slide deck. The actual deck.
Yeah.
Great. The lunch from today. Yes.
Yeah. Make sure.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. It's Miller, and I'm a botanic specialist on the science and policy team, and I'm standing in for Sam Wolf today, the Heritage Tree Program Manager, who was not able to make it. Today we will cover 2 heritage tree removal and delisting requests, followed by a UFC hearing and vote. Co-presenting with me will be Jesse Nellis, Senior Urban Forestry Non-Development Tree Inspector.
And speak up a little bit. Can't hear you down here.
We will begin with a brief overview of the heritage tree removal process before discussing the removal request for heritage tree number 74, a Spanish chestnut, and 324, a Pacific madrone. I'll introduce the trees and Jesse will present his findings. The UFC will have an opportunity to discuss, hear public comment, and vote on each heritage tree removal and delisting request after the presentation. So a little background on the heritage tree program. Heritage trees are recognized for their size, age, kind, historical association, or horticultural value, and are of special importance to the city. They're designated by a city council, are required to be preserved, and considered to have the greatest protection a tree can have in Portland. There are a variety of people involved, including city staff, volunteers, property owners, and the community at large. Okay. Like many living things, heritage trees decline over time, and due to their size and location, physical removal of the trees may be necessary to ensure safety. There are 2 scenarios of tree removal described in Title 11. Removal of heritage trees could take place due to an emergency or due to severe decline in health. Both cases today are regarding trees that are in severe decline in health. If approved, urban forestry will proceed with removing the trees. In addition to the removal requests, urban forestry is seeking UFC approval to remove heritage designation or delisting these 2 heritage trees. If approved, we will include these 2 trees to the list of recommendations to City Council this summer. After the presentation, the UFC may vote on the removal requests and delisting requests. Approval to physically remove the trees needs to be supported by at least 6 members of UFC. I'll pass it on to Jesse to provide information regarding the 2 trees in question.
Thank you, Biz, and good morning, UFC members. Both trees brought forward today are right-of-way trees. The non-development permitting group has reached out to the adjacent property owners to discuss these cases, and the adjacent property owners are supportive of the tree removal and delisting process if approved by the UFC today. Being right-of-way trees, urban forestry would remove the 2 trees and grind out the stumps from the right-of-way, and the adjacent property owner would be responsible for the replanting of 1 mitigation tree. First tree in question is heritage tree number 74. This Spanish chestnut was designated as a heritage tree in 1995. Case was brought to UF's attention by the high voltage utility due to their concern with the large dead sections in its mid to upper canopy that overhang the power lines. The urban forestry tree inspector performed the initial site visit, and I completed a second inspection to confirm the tree is in severe decline and needs to be removed. This heritage tree was originally located on private property in 1995, but was very close to the right-of-way on Johnson Creek Boulevard. A street construction resulted in widening of the public right-of-way, and great efforts by the property owners saved the tree from removal at that time. As a result, a sidewalk easement was created and purchased by the city to meander the sidewalk towards the property in order to retain the tree. The tree was originally a private tree, but based on the field measurements and records from PBOT, it now appears to straddle the right-of-way line. So it's considered a street tree, where it is the responsibility of the city to maintain and remove. The property owners have been involved in this conversation and agreed to this arrangement. Heritage tree number 74 is located in a large planting strip where the sidewalk meanders around the tree. The tree overhangs a busy road with high traffic and needs to be removed to keep the right-of-way safe. Apart from the sidewalk and bike lane directly under the tree canopy, there is another sidewalk and bike lane across the street that would be impacted were the entire tree to fail. There are multiple houses that are also within strike distance of the tree, and both limb failure and full tree failure could impact the high voltage power lines and communication lines directly under the dead sections. Heritage tree number 74 has wounds and decay found at its root plate, but no large decayed pockets or cavities were discovered after probing the lower trunk and root plate with a 4-foot-long metal tool. While the tree does have these defects, it does not qualify as an emergency tree removal. The health of the tree has declined to a point where there is no longer any tree care or pruning options to revive the tree. Pruning the tree is not an option considering the upper and most of the mid canopy is dead, and pruning out the dead sections would remove most of the tree and still present safety concerns for the right-of-way. Urban Forestry recommends tree removal along with delisting the tree as a heritage tree. Moving on to the second heritage tree in question is the second tree is the Pacific Madrone, located in the right-of-way. Heritage tree number 324 was designated in 2016 and is currently more than 50% dead. The tree has high voltage lines running through its canopy, and the entire section over the private property is dead. And the part that still has some green canopy is showing signs of dieback. The tree is experiencing severe decline and is in poor condition. An urban forestry tree inspector did the first site visit and I performed the second inspection. The adjacent property owner agrees that the tree needs to be removed and is supportive of the tree removal and the delisting process. Heritage tree number 324 is showing signs of what I think is Phytophthora, which quickly moves from the roots up into the canopy. When a Pacific Madrone has Phytophthora, large sections of the trunk blacken and appear to have been burnt. The pathogen then moves up into the scaffold limbs and quickly kills the live tree tissue. Pruning the tree is not an option, considering more than one half of the tree is dead, and the remaining section of the canopy is not viable to remain overhanging the street. While the tree does not qualify for an emergency removal, Urban Forestry recommends tree removal as soon as possible, along with delisting the tree as a heritage tree. This concludes my inspection findings. I'll pass it back to Brian Lando and the UFC to continue with the hearing and the vote.
Right. I'll turn to the chair to facilitate, but yeah, the options are to, the commission has to both vote to remove the tree, and then the delisting is sort of a housekeeping step after that to officially remove it from the rolls of the heritage tree program.
So I know we're right at almost 11:30.
Yeah.
Are there any questions or comments before we vote?
I have one brief comment on tree number 74. It might be worth looking more into it, but I believe that the other Spanish chestnut that was on that site uprooted or broke off at the base. So I don't know if it's something that you consider to be removing sooner than later, as far as more hazardous than the Madrone, in my opinion.
Yeah, there was another black walnut adjacent to it that was removed a long time ago, but then there was a private property's chestnut that failed into the street.
Yeah, 21, I believe. Something to consider as far as
Commissioner Vandermark?
I think I would just go on the record to say I support. I think it's sadly the trees are in decline. The adjacent property owner is in agreement, and so forth. A question that I have, I think I've raised this before, is are we seeing an increase in the number of heritage trees needing to be delisted because of decline? I mean, I don't know if it's just my tenure and I've seen too many of these, so at some point it's cumulative, or not. I mean, I know that madrones, I'm seeing a lot of struggling, mature drones, but I'm just curious if are we seeing an increase, right? Is this a larger issue?
I'll address that. This is City Forester Cairo. We will get back to you on that. As I was out of the room, but Biz Miller is here today in place of Sam Wolf, who is our heritage tree manager. So we'll follow up with Sam and get back to you on that. And what do you mean increase, like year to year?
Yeah, like it's just in terms of, you know, a percentage or something.
Got it.
We seen more
Over
decline
time.
in these beautiful, large, you know, mature trees, and understandably heritage trees decline. They're old trees, but yeah, I'm just trying to be like, should we be concerned?
We'll get back to you. Thank you for clarification.
And just following up on that, like that would be helpful because I wonder about like, do we want to try to recognize more trees for that protection to kind of address the fact that we're losing more.
Folks are welcome and invited to submit applications with the property owner's approval. So we're doing that.
Yeah. To approve both recommendations for heritage tree removal and delisting.
I second that.
All in favor? Any opposed? Well, just 1 minute over.
Yeah,
But thank you. So we'll be discussing in June. Yes, the code alignment project. I will.
Bring that back.
Thank you, commissioners. Take care.
Thank you.
Like that.